I stood there in the kitchen doorway, my heart hammering against my ribs like it wanted to escape. He held out the small velvet box, that knowing half-smile playing on his lips, the one that always made my stomach twist in ways I couldn't explain. My husband was still at the office, wouldn't be home for hours, and here I was, barefoot in nothing but his oversized old t-shirt, the hem brushing my thighs. The faint scent of sandalwood cologne drifted from him, mixing with the warm leather smell of the box as he pressed it into my hands. "Just a little something to help you settle in, sweetheart," he murmured, voice low and rough like gravel under tires. I swallowed hard, fingers trembling around the soft fabric. What was this? Why did my skin already feel too warm, too aware of how close he stood, who had only been married 6 months when the promotion came? Long hours, even longer trips. His father, recently widowed, moved into the guest house out back to help out around the place. It was supposed to be temporary, family looking after family, but now his footsteps on the gravel path filled every quiet evening, close enough that I could hear the steady rhythm of them at night, pulling me to the window more than once. The next morning he appeared at the kitchen door with fresh pastries, steam still rising from the bag. "Thought we could share coffee like old times," he said, stepping inside without waiting for an answer. His hand brushed mine as he passed the warm mug, those calloused fingers lingering just a second to long against my skin. Rough warmth, the kind that sent a shiver racing up my arm before I could stop it. I told myself it was nothing. He was just being kind, a father-in-law looking after his son's young wife. But inside, my body remembered that sandalwood scent from the velvet box already, clinging to my thoughts like smoke. Why did it make my breath catch? Why did the ache settle low and quiet, whispering things I had no right to hear? He sat across from me at the small table, eyes steady on mine while we talked about nothing important. The morning light caught the silver at his temples, the way his shoulders filled the doorway earlier. Harmless. This was harmless. I repeated it like a prayer even as heat bloomed across my cheeks and I had to look away, focusing on the swirl of cream in my coffee instead of the memory of his touch still tingling on my hand. Later that afternoon, I hid the velvet box deep in my drawer, telling myself I'd never open it. Never even think about it again. Yet when I glanced out the window and saw him mowing the lawn, shirtless under the sun, something twisted sharp in my chest. The way his body moved so freely, muscles shifting with each push. While I sat here in this big empty house, aching in a marriage that already felt miles away. "Ups, your husband's father. Stop." But they didn't quiet the pull. Not really. I pressed my forehead to the cool glass, breath fogging it slightly, and wondered how long I could keep pretending this was all innocent. My husband called that evening to say he'd be late again. The house felt too quiet, too full of echoes, so I invited him in for dinner, voice steadier than I felt. We sat across the small table, wine loosening our tongues as the hours slipped by. He told stories about my husband as a boy, voice warm with memory, while under the table his knee accidentally pressed against mine. The smooth oak felt cold compared to the heat radiating from his leg. I didn't pull away, not right away. Desire flickered low and dangerous, and I hated myself for the way my pulse quickened, for the way I kept sipping wine to hide how breathless I suddenly was. He laughed softly at something he'd said, the sound rolling over me like warm honey. His eyes met mine across the candlelight, holding just a beat longer than they should, and in that moment, with the scent of sandalwood still faint on the air between us, I felt the first real crack in the careful walls it built. This shouldn't feel like this. Should it? Yet when he finally stood to leave, his hand brushed my shoulder in a goodnight gesture that lingered. Fingers warmed through the thin fabric of my shirt. I stayed seated, heart racing, listening to his footsteps fade across the yard toward the guest house, already wondering what tomorrow morning would bring, and terrified of how much I wanted to find out. That afternoon I slipped the velvet box into the back of my drawer, pushing it behind folded scarves as if hiding it could silence the pull. Shook a little, closing the drawer. Yes, your husband's father. The thought looped like a warning bell, sharp and insistent, yet my mind kept drifting back to the way his fingers had brushed mine over that coffee mug. The quiet heat that had stayed on my skin for hours afterward. I told myself I was being ridiculous, A married woman shouldn't feel this restless, this aware of every small sound from the backyard. But when I glanced out the window later, there he was mowing the lawn in the late sun, shirt off, sweat tracing lines down his back, the easy strength in his shoulders, the way the light caught on his skin. It sent an unwelcome twist through my chest. Nth, maybe, or something hungrier, while I stood here trapped in a house that felt too big and too empty. Hi husband's texts growing shorter each day. Stop, just stop. The word burned behind my eyes, but it didn't cool the slow ache blooming low in my body. I turned away from the glass, pressing cool palms to my flushed cheeks, breathing too fast for someone doing nothing at all. Evening came with another call from my husband. Running late again, sweetheart. Don't wait up. His voice sounded tired, distant, already moving on to the next meeting. The silence after he hung up pressed and heavy. Before I could overthink it, I walked to the edge of the yard and called across to the guest house. Dinner's almost ready, if you're hungry. He appeared at the door minutes later, hair still damp from a shower, that faint and walled scent drifting ahead of him like an invitation I hadn't meant to extend. We sat at the small kitchen table, wine glasses catching the low light. He spoke of my husband as a boy, voice low and fond, stories I'd never heard. His knee brushed mine under the table once, then stayed. Warm, solid, but pallid, impossible to ignore against the cool wood. I should have shifted away. Instead, I stayed perfectly still, heart hammering so loudly I wondered if he could hear it. The heat from his legs seeped through my thin pants, spreading like a secret I was too ashamed to name. Every small movement sent electricity whispering up my thigh. I sipped the wine faster than I should, hoping it would dull the edge, but it only loosened something deeper. His laugh came soft when he recalled some childhood mischief, the sound wrapping around me warmer than the candle flame between us. Our eyes met across the table and held. A beat too long, the air thickening until breathing felt like work. I hated how my body leaned into the moment, how my pulse quickened at the nearness of him. This is wrong, Chia's family, but the thought felt distant, drowned out by the steady rhythm of his breathing so close. Later that night, alone in the dark bedroom, I lay staring at the ceiling when soft as drifted through the open window from the guest house. The same slow, smoky song my husband used to play for me on quiet evenings, back when he still came home early enough to hold me. Now it floated from his father's space, accompanied by the low murmur of his voice on a phone call, warm and intimate in a way that twisted sharp jealousy through my ribs. I imagined him giving that same gentle attention to someone else. The thought stung more than it should. Toward the drawer almost on its own, fingers hovering over the handle before I yanked it back as if burned. No, I'm not that kind of wife. I'm not, but the music kept playing, slow and insistent, curling into my thoughts like smoke. The ache from earlier returned, deeper now, mixing with the guilt until I couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. I pulled the sheet higher, trying to block it all out, yet my mind kept circling back to the dinner table, to the press of his knee, the way his eyes had lingered. Sleep refused to come easy, and somewhere in the quiet hours, the velvet box in the drawer seemed to pulse with its own quiet promise, a temptation I swore I wouldn't touch. The following evening he winced while reaching for a shelf in the kitchen, shoulder tight from some old injury he never complained about. I found myself stepping behind him without thinking, my fingers pressing into the knotted muscle through his thin shirt. The scent of sandalwood rose stronger from his warm skin, wrapping around me like a memory I hadn't turned. "You don't have to do this," he murmured, voice low and rough at the edges. But I stayed, thumb circling slow and careful, feeling the heat of him sink into my palms. Each press brought us closer, my breath catching every time his back shifted against my front. I told myself it was only kindness, only helping family. Yet the way his muscles loosened under my touch made something inside me loosen too, a dangerous unraveling I couldn't name. His breathing deepened, steady and warm, brushing the air near my wrist. I fought the urge to lean in further, to let my cheek rest against his shoulder blade just for a second. "This is wrong. It's your husband's father." The words echoed faint, almost lost beneath the quiet rhythm of our shared silence. Alone later in the dark bedroom, I finally gave in. My hands trembled as I opened the velvet box, the sleek toy cool and beautifully crafted against my fingers. He had chosen it himself. "It cheed," he said once, "just for you, something to take the edge off when the house feels too quiet." The moment it touched me, the memory of his voice flooded back, that Lodge's song drifting from the guest house mixing with the phantom warmth of his shoulder under my hands. Pleasure rose sharp and sudden, shame twisting right behind it as his name slipped from my lips instead of my husband's. A whisper so soft it barely left the room. I pressed my face into the pillow afterward, heart still racing, the ache only half satisfied. How had it come to this? My body craving the echo of a man who should have been nothing more than family. The guilt burned hot in my chest, yet it couldn't drown the hunger that kept pulling me back to the box night after night. I swore each time would be the last. Each time the lie felt thinner. Our evening routines grew heavier with unspoken weight. A simple goodnight hug lingered longer than it should, his palm settling low on my back, fingers tracing the subtle curve of my spine through the thin fabric of my shirt. The rough warmth of his hand against my smoother skin sent tiny sparks racing up my spine. I pulled away slowly, telling myself it meant nothing, that it was only comfort between lonely people. But every night after, alone in bed, I replayed the exact texture of that touch, the way his fingers had pressed just enough to make me aware of every inch of fabric between us. Desire won small, secret battles against the morality that still whispered warnings in the back of my mind. I caught myself watching him through the window more often, the way he moved with quiet strength, the faint smile he gave when our eyes met across the yard. The jazz would start again some evenings, slow and smoky, and my hand would drift toward the drawer almost against my will. The obsession had taken root now, quiet and deep, feeding on every accidental brush and every shared glance that lasted a heartbeat too long. One night the hug goodnight happened again, but this time his fingers didn't lift right away. They stayed, warm and steady, drawing a slow, invisible line along my lower back that made my knees feel unsteady. I should have stepped back. I should have laughed it off like before. Instead, I stood there, breath shallow, letting the heat of his palm seep through until it felt like the only real thing in the room. His eyes held mine in the dim hallway light, something unspoken flickering there that made my pulse stumble. The air between us thickened, heavy with everything we were and saying, and for one endless moment I wondered what would happen if I didn't pull away at all. The guilt crashed in right after, sharp and cold, but it came too late to stop the craving that had already begun to bloom wider, sweeter, more dangerous than before. One stormy night the rain hammered the roof like it wanted in, and the wine we shared loosened everything we'd kept chained down. He sat across from me at the small table, eyes darker than the clouds outside, and the words finally slipped free. "I picked that gift because I can't stop thinking about you in that big bed all alone," he said, voice low and rough as gravel under tires. My breath caught hard in my throat. The confession hung between us, thick and electric, while thunder rolled close enough to rattle the windows. This can't happen, I thought, even as my body leaned a fraction closer, pulled by the same gravity that had been building for weeks. His gaze held mine without blinking, and in that moment the air felt too warm, too heavy, like the storm had moved inside the house. We stood up without planning it, drawn into the dimly lit living room where shadows stretched long across the floor, inches apart now. His hand rose slowly, cupping my cheek with a tenderness that made my knees tremble. The rough pad of his thumb brushed across my lower lip, sending a shiver racing straight down my spine. Sandalwood wrapped around me, warm and familiar, mixing with the faint scent of rain on his skin. Our breathing fell into the same unsteady rhythm, shallow and quick, like we were both afraid to break the silence first. His head lowered, mouth hovering so close I could almost taste the warmth of him, a millimeter away from everything we shouldn't want. My heart slammed against my ribs, terror and thrill twisting together until I couldn't tell them apart. Just one breath more and headlights swept sudden and bright across the driveway, cutting through the curtains like a warning. My husband's car. We sprang apart as if burned, chests heaving, the almost moment searing into my skin like a brand I'd carry forever. He stepped back into the shadows, eyes still locked on mine with something raw and unspoken. I turned toward the door, forcing a smile that felt cracked at the edges, while inside everything shook. Now I lie awake every night listening to the faint just drifting from the guest house, slow and smoky, curling through the dark like an invitation I can't accept. The velvet box stays hidden, yet its pull grows stronger with each passing hour, the secret use more desperate when the house falls quiet. And my husband kisses me goodnight, warm and familiar and completely oblivious, his touch gentle where mine burns with remembered heat. I close my eyes and see the storm again, feel that thumb against my lip, hear the confession echoing in the thunder. I know I should stop this craving before it breaks us all. I know the next time we're alone the boundary might finally give way. But the ache lingers sweet and devastating, a quiet hunger that refuses to fade, leaving me suspended between what I have and what I can't stop wanting, wondering how much longer I can pretend the line still holds.